In this video, I want to talk about positioning. Positioning is at the core of Valorant. It is the tactics in tactical shooter. At the pro level, when every player has almost perfect aim and awareness, it is often the only separating factor between teams. What positions you should play, how you should play them, and when you should play them, goes to the heart of Valorant and its strategic possibilities. Good positioning can easily be the difference between iron and gold, between gold and immortal, and between immortal and radiant. In researching this video, I arrived at 30 different kinds of positions that are played between the attack and defense sides, and I'm certain that there are even more that I haven't discovered. For part 1, I'll be focusing on pre-planned attack side positioning. But before I continue, I want to talk about an important distinction: the difference between macro positioning and micro positioning. Macro positioning is how you position yourself on the map. It is best described as being in the right place at the right time. It is the difference between retaking site from CT or retaking site from CT short and long. It is the difference between 5-man rushing a stacked site or strategically applying pressure throughout the map to bait out enemy rotations and then attacking the weakened site. Good macro positioning is all about taking space or holding space. It is about knowing what parts of the map are open, what parts are dangerous, and filling in the gaps where needed, when needed. Micro positioning is about how you position yourself in a small, contained area, such as the bomb site. This is about what angle you choose to hold, whether it's a common angle or an off angle, crouched or standing, strafed or not strafed, whether you're playing in cover or out in the open. It is about how you react to small changes in information and reposition yourself to take advantage. Micro positioning becomes especially important in contested spaces when your movement is limited by enemy line of sight. Good micro positioning is about taking advantage of these small timings to move to the best possible angle. This might be an unexpected position to catch enemies out, an angle that supports a teammate, or an angle that has more cover and safety. I plan to go into macro and micro positioning in more detail for a future video, but for now it's enough that you keep this distinction in mind. Today's video will be more about the big picture and the macro positioning you can implement for a successful attack half. Number 1. Default. If you've been playing Valorant a while, you've almost certainly heard the term default. Let's play default is one of the most common callouts, but what does it mean exactly? A default in Valorant is when you play the whole map. You're going to put your players in key areas throughout the map and maintain control of those areas. This will include any choke point that the enemies would have to pass through in order to push. It is often called playing for picks, but there are many more reasons to play a default than just to net kills. It is also about controlling space on the map, limiting your opponent's counterplay, gathering information on enemy tendencies, and baiting out the enemy's utility. There are a million specific defaults you can play, but there are two main types. First, there is a passive default, often called a hard default, where you are going to sit back and wait. Instead of peeking out and fighting the enemy directly, you're going to play like a rat and wait to see what the enemy does. If the enemy makes a careless push, fantastic. You get free information on enemy positions with minimal risk and the possibility of a free pick. The other kind of default is an aggressive default, often called playing for picks, and this is when you will be peeking out and using your abilities to contest key areas. You might push up and gain control of one of the mains, or mid. Your goal here is to gain space, bait out enemy abilities, and get a pick. Now we come to the critical point, and that is that you can mix and match passive and aggressive defaults. And this is why there are so many different ways to play default. For example, you can play aggressive on one side of the map and passive on the other. Often, when you play aggressive on one side of the map, the enemy defenders will take it as a cue to aggress on their side of the map, taking more control and maybe committing to the flank. But by playing passive here, perhaps on an off angle, you can catch these enemies out and punish their aggression. The possibilities for defaults are nearly endless. You can play aggressive early, take space, and then revert to a passive default from your new advanced position. You can play passive for 30 seconds, gain information, and then group up for a hit on the weaker side. How you choose to mix and match your defaults is ultimately up to you. I'd love to be able to say that this default always works and this one always doesn't, but it's not that simple. Which defaults will ultimately work and which ones won't is highly specific to both teams. My advice to you here is to play many different combinations throughout a game, playing aggressive and passive on different sides and with different timings. Some will work and some won't, but it should make your play unpredictable, and an unpredictable opponent is far harder to beat. Number 2. The main rush. This is solo queue Valorant in a nutshell. This is when you push one of the mains, either as a 4 or a 5, with the intention of taking the side, planting the bomb, and winning the round. A good main rush is quick, decisive, and utterly overwhelming for the enemy defenders. At the pro level, they are so afeared that oftentimes defenders will opt to play retake rather than face the fury of a set execute. To execute a main rush successfully, timing matters. If you do it too slowly, while making lots of noise, you give the enemies plenty of time to rotate and fortify the defenses. Smokes, mollies, and stuns. These are the abilities that can stop an execute in its tracks. You have 3 options to overcome this obstacle. 1. You push quickly to beat the abilities, flooding onto sight before they have a chance to molly, smoke, or stun. 2. You play silently, not giving them any sound cue they can use to activate their smokes and mollies, getting as close as possible to the entrance before you rush out. Or 3. You opt to wait out these abilities. If you opt to wait them out, then you need to be cutting noise. If the defenders hear 5 sets of footsteps stomping around in main 40 seconds after your stall to execute, you can bet that they are going to stack that side, and you're going to have a bad time. Number 3. The split take. This is the gentleman's side take. Instead of bullying your way through the main and hoping you don't get mollied, blinded, and crossfired at the choke, you opt to split your resources. Some of your players will attack through main, and the rest will go through mid or another avenue to the side. Split takes are much more effective at taking side, and harder to counter once they're fully in motion. Defenders can't play these forward positions as easily, lest they risk getting pinched, and this severely limits their counterplay. However, split takes have their downsides too. They are much harder to set up, and they are much easier for defenders to interrupt. In essence, with more complexity and more moving parts, more things can go wrong. For example, the mid players will be especially vulnerable as they move into position, since enemies can peek them from multiple angles. For this reason, you should be devoting some utility that will allow them to cross safely, such as a smoke or a wall. It is imperative that you time both pushes correctly. If one side moves too quickly, it is a surefire way to lose the round. So, when one side of the execute gets stalled, perhaps by a molly, communicate this to your team and call when your side is ready to go out. This can be coordinated with a simple countdown of on 3, 3, 2, 1, let's go. Number 4. The fake. If you're tired of pushing side, only to find that the entire enemy team is waiting for you, then this is the side take for you. To fake a side, you are going to devote 1, 2, or even 3 players to make a lot of noise on the opposite side. Their goal is to convince the enemy team that this is a genuine side take, and pull rotates. Fakes are most convincing when paired with the abilities that usually precipitate a rush, such as a Sova drone, a Fade Prowler, Arena Eye, Smokes, and so on. When done correctly, these ability combinations can create immense pressure on the opposing team. And if they're really afraid, they will panic call for a rotate, thus freeing up the opposite side and allowing for an easy execute. When you're faking a side, there are 2 philosophies. 1 is to just throw out the abilities and then immediately regroup with your team. The second is to make as much noise as possible for as long as possible. Both are correct, and both have their uses. Which one you use depends on your enemy's ability to get information. If the enemy's information is limited, either by distance so they can't hear footsteps, or utility so they don't have line of sight, then there is a strong case to use the first kind of fake. If the enemies can't check if the sight execute is genuine, they have to treat it as if it is genuine, and they will devote at least a few players to that possibility. If you then regroup with your team, you can be certain that the numbers will be in your favour. The second philosophy, making as much noise for as long as possible, is more common. You want to keep the enemies convinced that this is a genuine sight execute, right up until the moment your team takes the other side. Making footsteps, using abilities, and getting scanned by the enemy's recons, these are the things that will convince the enemy team it is genuine. If you leave too early, the enemies won't be convinced to rotate, or even worse, they might be convinced that it's a fake and stack the other side, which is the exact opposite of what you wanted. Lastly, fakes rarely work if all the fakers die. This is when the players faking overcommit to selling the fake and lose their lives as a result. These high-risk fakes only work when you're certain you can win the post-plant with fewer players. I would only recommend this when you have strong post-plant ultimates and line-up Larrys who can buy you as much time as possible. For that reason, I would not recommend dying on the fake 99% of the time. And that is because as you move into higher ranks, any numbers advantage will count for more and more, and teams will know how to deal with line-up Larrys and post-plant ultimates. So, if you're going to fake, stay alive, so you can later regroup with your team and give yourself the best chance of winning the round. Number 5. LURKS. There are two kinds of attack side lurks that you need to learn. There is the deep lurk and the late lurk. The deep lurk is about penetrating the enemy's defenses without them noticing. You're trying to get as far forward as possible, until you're in a position they'll never expect, and you can catch them off guard. Deep lurks often happen once there have been a couple of trades and gaps have opened up in the enemy's defenses. But if the enemy team is sloppy, you can find timings when the enemy is distracted or rotating from the site. Deep lurks can be used to open up a site by getting a pick or the information that a site is empty. They can also be used to cut off enemy rotations. While your team is hitting the other site, you can push forward and prevent the defenders from rotating by holding from an unexpected position. Be very careful with the deep lurk. The most common mistake I see with deep lurks is pushing too far and too greedily. When you're executing a deep lurk in enemy territory, you have to understand that there are areas which are extremely dangerous to pass through, so-called danger zones. Danger zones can be dangerous in one of two ways. The first way is being out in the open, where there are multiple angles you can be peeked from. In these areas, it doesn't matter how unexpected or crazy good your timing. All it takes is an enemy to accidentally look your way. And because they can be hiding behind any one of these angles, the odds are that you won't even see them kill you. The second danger zone is when an enemy will probably be looking your way anyway. It removes all of the advantage garnered from the deep lurk, and gives the enemy a fair aim duel, which is the last thing you want. An example of this will be peeking spawn from the A site on ascent, when your team is no longer applying pressure on the B site. When the enemies start to rotate, they're going to be looking at you, and their reaction time might just be faster. It is much better to stop the lurk before then, and instead post on an unexpected angle, ready to surprise the defenders with your deep positioning. The last warning I have for the deep lurk is don't overdo it. The more times you deep lurk, the more the enemy will expect it, and you're not going to have a good time. Instead, use it sparingly, and like all impactful plays, you should save it for important rounds. Don't waste it on a round you are very unlikely to win. For example, if your whole team dies while you're lurking, and it's not realistic for you to win the round, it is better to abandon the lurk and get spotted from a normal position instead, so you don't give away the timing you just found. If they even suspect that you were lurking, the defenders will likely tighten up their defenses, and you won't find that timing again. Number 6. The late lurk. The late lurk is quite different from the deep lurk, because you're going to be playing a normal or expected angle, but you're doing so on a late and unexpected timing. The perfect late lurk happens when you appear from an area the defenders have just cleared. Good players will know the timing for somebody to be in a particular space, and they will clear and hold angles for that timing. But they can't hold it forever, especially when there's pressure applied elsewhere. At some point, they have to assume that that area is clear. The late lurk plays against this timing. You are intentionally not turning up in that space with the timing that the enemies could expect. You are 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 20 seconds late, depending on the situation. If you're playing close enough, you can activate off of the sound cue that the enemies have given up holding for you, and shoot them in the back. Late lurks are also useful as a counter lurk. The enemy lurker may find a timing to start pushing in behind your team, but because you're on a late timing, they won't expect you to be behind them, and you can easily catch them out like this. So, when should you late lurk? Late lurks are not without risk, and they should be used intelligently. The biggest risk you take with a late lurk is weakening your execute. With one less player, your team will have a harder time clearing the side. So don't do it every round. One of the most common and effective uses for the late lurk is when you know you have a free side. Now, there's no risk of weakening an execute, and the value of the late lurk is that much higher because you are more likely to intercept enemies. Another good time to use the late lurk is when you're exceptionally low on HP and you're out of abilities that could help your teammates. With so little HP, you would likely lose any fair gunfight, and you're out of any abilities that would help your team take the side. By late lurking, however, you have the chance to leverage that tiny amount of HP for the full health of an enemy by posting in an unexpected position. Finally, if you have a timing and you're on the lurk, make sure that you are communicating this to your team. Tell them you have a good lurk, or that you're behind an enemy. When lurking, remember, be silent to your enemies, not to your team. So, to sum up, the 6 pre-planned attack side positions you can use are: Number 1, the default. Number 2, the main rush. Number 3, the split take. Number 4, the fake. Number 5, the deep lurk, and number 6, the late lurk. An attack side half has 12 rounds, and these are just 6 macro positioning tools I've listed today. But if you were to use all of these tools throughout the half, you would make it extremely difficult for defenders to predict your positioning. By mapping it out like this, you can see that there is now so little room for your tendencies to become noticeable. If you think about these positions like tools, the more tools you use, the more unpredictable you become. Instead of the enemy just predicting which side you'll rush and stacking that side, they have to predict all of these layers to your positioning, which forces them to spread their resources thinner and makes each tool that much more effective. So that's the video, guys. This has been a summary of pre-planned attack side positions. If I missed any positions, or if you want me to go into any more detail about any of the positions mentioned here today, please let me know below in the comments, and I'll consider making an addendum to this video. If you liked the video and want me to continue making content like this, please like and subscribe.